Black doesn't control the narrative. You must narrative itself. And
Well, see, they don't control the narrative, but they are a part
to the narrative.
They do play a role in the system.
It's hard to control. Yeah, it's hard to control a narrative, but you should still challenge the narrative. But while we have Terrence here, go ahead, Roger.
Well, I just want to say one little thing to respond to Reed. I don't control the narrative. Really, the question is who does, and even if we not only challenge the narrative, why not use the narrative to get that you want? Because humans are flawed. Even though let's say the system and originally was designed to fuck Black Americans, but you can still use the system to your advantage. Because actually, I was talking to him the other day, and he was like, American is not the race. He's like, it's the least race. I'm looking at him like, okay, sure. But he did have good points, whereas the Black male, even being quote unquote oppressed, still will should achieve rights. They necessarily haven't done it in other countries. And he is right, but that's because the system can be played. So yes, you don't control the narrative, but you can use a narrative to say what you want. But again, that takes keen insight and a will to do, and that's not, and most people, period.
Thank you. That definitely is helpful. But Terrence, you also have a podcast. Can you tell our listeners more about your podcast?
Yeah, one, I went through that whole journey of, I called it, during the campaign, I called it being a student to the community. Like that was our tagline. We need to become a student to the community. Most people weren't comfortable with students, that term student, being placed on a person that will lead a city. They were used to a person coming in who had perfect, excellent ideas, who said, I will either save you or I will, propose. But I said, no, good ideas should come from ground up. In order for it to come from the ground, I must become a student. But I heard several questions. People didn't know what a mayor does. And I'm in a weak mayor structure. So our city manager really operates the city. The mayor is really the figurehead, but our city manager is the one that really runs the city. So people didn't know what a mayor does. They didn't know the history of, of Black America and engaging local government and winning. They didn't know how they could leverage advocacy so that it makes a difference rather than coming in late when something was already being created or destroyed. And so some of these questions, I just mentally was jotting them down, and I made it into a podcast. And so I started the podcast. It's called Illogical by Truth, because most people, when they think of local government, they're like, man, I don't even understand the language, the land use map. All that is foreign language to me. I was like, how can we simplify local government so it's consumable, so that people can actually be energized and engage in local power? If you don't know the language, if you can't interpret the language, if it's foreign to you, you're not going to engage. And so the podcast is supposed to make what is illogical logical. And so we start with Ella Baker and her view on leadership, like I mentioned earlier. And we talk about how she met in the basement of Shaw University. And the questions you should ask is, she was in Atlanta with King. Why did she come to Raleigh? Why did she not, meet with the kids at the provost's office or the president's office? Why was it this little basement in Shaw? Because you don't need to have a whole bunch of money. You don't even need to have the most powerful people. You can organize locally and change the United States, just like Ella Baker did. Most people don't even know her name, but they're living from the benefits of her organizing. And her organizing was that we should empower those on the ground, so that they don't have to be over dependent on people who have power up above. And so the illogical podcast is just to educate you on issues. So we talk about the first Black mayor of Atlanta. He and one of his policy platforms was to increase the number of subcontractors. He was like, home is one way to create wealth and families, one of the most popular, but also subcontracting with government is one of the ways you create wealth. So the way Atlanta looks now, with Black wealth being something that's just normal, it's not normal. If you come to Raleigh, you're not going to see that same picture if you come to Raleigh. If you go to Atlanta, you see somebody that's wealthy and Black, that's nothing to you. It's nothing. That's normal. But that didn't happen by mistake. It happened from local government, and it happened from the influence of local government. But these issues, most people assume that they can't influence or impact at all, and the power is in people, not in the government. That's why it's representative government, but it's been distorted for so long that people have assumed that they don't have no power in that space. So we're trying to unlock those hidden conversations.
Definitely.
You know the story of Atlanta Airport?
When he said that we need to train and find and support black subcontractors, am I
Yeah,
thinking
he
in the
said if you could lay
same way?
pavement, you can make an airport rail one way. That was just interesting. Like that was cool. If you could make pavement, then you can make airport runways. Like that was just, you don't find that kind of stuff now from the black community leaders. Like if you can do this, then you can do this. Like hey, you know how a computer work? Hey, you should do IT company to be subcontract to the government. Like that kind of stuff should be.
And you know what's crazy? The research says in order to see high engagement from a resident or a voter, then that is completely dependent on their relationship to land and property, and it's completely connected to their confidence or level of education. So we as sort of political leaders and candidates, we want people to come out. We want you to be engaged. We want you to come to every council meeting. We want you to come to every school board meeting. But we don't want to talk about your land ownership. We don't want to talk about your economic profile. We don't want to talk about not your land rental, your land ownership. We don't want to talk about the pipeline to wealth through subcontracting and home ownership. But we want you to come out to every community meeting. We want you to come to the website. We want you to plug in. We want to hear your voice. We want you to answer all surveys. But the research says if you help people create a connection, an ownership connection to land, then you will inherently get a more engaged audience. And I hate that we skip the land ownership and we go right to engagement. And so for a real campaign that wants real engagement from people, they need to be talking about subcontracting, land ownership, home ownership. That needs to be your number one. And not just saying I would champion it, but what does it mean to leverage private industry to make sure that there's enough resources to really pull it off?
All right, go ahead, ask him the other question, y'all.
Sure. So, looking at the race that you ran against the incumbent mayor before your campaign and after your campaign, looking back, what do you think are some things you could have done better?
Yeah, so most communities that I've had experience with, they normally do a good job at uh, dividing Black communities around who is the person that they should vote for. And I spent a lot of my time in sort of faith communities because the NAACP sort of historically rest on clergy. Like our meetings would be in churches all around the state, small Black churches all around the state. And most of my organizing hovered around those spaces. But we're seeing in America where the Christian membership or people who identify as Christians or as being a part of a faith member group is declining. And so I would divide my time across different groups that may or may not exist inside that Black faith tradition. And I would do that with the hope of making sure I hear from all of the Black community, and not just assume that that traditional faith model is the only way that people hear from policy issues or local issues.
That's right. These
Excellent.
people don't go to church no more.
Well, they go to church, but it's a different type of
Not like they
person
used
who's
to,
going.
though. Yeah,
Well,
not
yeah,
like
I
they
mean,
used
yeah,
to.
yeah.
Yeah,
Let's not like the civil rights era. Definitely not like the civil
correct.
rights era. But
Yeah.
Terrence, we really have enjoyed having you on the podcast. Is there anything that you want to have our viewers take a look at? Anything they should check out? Or a favorite question that I get asked all the time by Reed is there a book people should be reading?
Yeah, so thank you again for having me. Very rarely do I get invite to be on an all-black podcast with black men. So it's good to be surrounded by all of you. So one, I appreciate the invitation. Number two, I would love for you to come and listen to Logical by Truth. Really, the goal is to give you tools to feel empowered locally. Black America has a very strong, rich history of changing the country just by local efforts. And so we're on everything from Spotify, every platform that you can plug into, we're on everything. And right now, with this idea of revisiting what should or should not be in history, years ago, Pauli Murray, a native of Durham, North Carolina, Pauli Murray wrote a book where she wrote down every law that confirmed or supported or legalized racism in every state. She put it in one book. And that's the book I'm reading right now.
What's that book?
Awesome.
It's I believe it's A Color of Law. The Pauli Murray. It's the same book that the civil rights attorneys, NAACP attorneys, used to fight their legislation. But Pauli Murray is a giant that most people sleep on. But that book was considered the civil rights Bible. And I believe it's called The Color of Law. I'll email it if there's a correction to that.
Black civil rights, or because I believe the LGBT community consider them to be in the same place as black people, but that book would probably explain to them.
That and at the time that book was written, it was only talking about skin.
That's right.
Yep. So that when that book was written, there was no sort of broadening of the term. It was skin. For black people, you cannot do this, and this by the law.
Yeah, I don't think they ever suffered that kind of, pink water fountain that didn't exist, of course, where only gays could drink from pink water fountains. I just don't. I always say that argument. I'm just like, your fight is different. Like, fight your fight, and I agree with you guys to some extent. But like, what you guys suffered and what we suffered are different. It's simply based on the color of skin.
The correct name, I just wanted to just find it before I did. The correct name is States Law on Race and Color. States Law on Race and Color.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Terrence. I really did appreciate it. Reed, you want to finish this up?
I'm driving, so get someone else to do it.
All right. Well, thanks again, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to another episode of Everyday Black Man Podcast, a podcast for authentic black male thought. It was Riker, Reed, Armstead. Oh, actually, no, not Armstead. The writer, Black Libertarian, Sham, and our special guest today was Terrence. Really do appreciate it. And as we always say, check out our Patreon, EBMP. We also have a Facebook page at Everyday Black Men. And our website is www.everydayblackmen.com. But make sure that you also check out our MySpace. We have lots of MySpace, and we really love running that gag into the ground. But no, really, all things considered, we really do appreciate you, Terrence, for stopping by, and really hope that if any of our listeners have any questions, they'll reach out to us, and we will reach out to you. And come back, because we love having repeat guests.
I love it. Thank you for having me.